Okay, welcome everyone to this incredibly important session on delivering net zero. Can it be done? I'm Scott Mason. I'm the chair of CIBSE Patrons, and I'm incredibly excited to be here today contributing to this really enjoyable, educational, and incredibly well-structured conference. Thank you as well to the BESA for this fantastic opportunity for CIBSE Patrons to collaborate. I genuinely believe that collaboration is going to be one of the cornerstones in delivering net zero. It's more important now than ever that we listen to every part of the building services supply chain to make sure that building services can do its bit as effectively as possible in the fight against climate change. In June 2019, the UK government amended its Climate Change Act to become the first major economy in the world to make it a legally binding commitment to reach net zero by 2050. And if we're going to reach this target, we're going to require some serious and extensive innovation and changes to our energy systems. Today, I'm joined by a really exciting panel that represents a great cross-section of the building services supply chain. We're going to discuss and debate some of the potentially disruptive changes and challenges that a range of sectors and industries are likely to face in achieving this ambition. So first of all, I would like to introduce Martin, Head of Sustainability for Mitsubishi Electric. Welcome, Martin.
Hi, Scott.
And next up, I have... Oh, very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah,
welcome.
not too bad,
Jumping onto Josh straight away. Sorry about Joshua Emerson, Marketing Manager from Swegon. Welcome, Josh.
Hi, Scott. Nice to be here.
Yeah, good. And last of all on our panel today, we've got Will, who is the Technical Leader at Laing and Chair for the BESA Technical Committee. Welcome, Will.
Hi, Scott. How you doing?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Very excited.
We've got Jeff as well.
And I would also like to introduce, who's just popped up on the screen, fantastic timing, Jeff. This is Jeff House. He's the Head of External Affairs at BAXI Heating. Welcome, Jeff.
Afternoon, Scott.
Afternoon. Okay, so delivering net zero. So it's an incredibly important but also very broad topic, which I'm sure this panel could discuss for hours. But for the purpose of today's BESA session, delivering net zero, it's very much going to focus, of course, on building engineering services. So with this in mind, our first question, in line and in keeping with the topic, is it achievable? Let's do a bit of a round robin. Joshua, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, from it, the short answer is yes. That would be my angle on it. We have the technology to do it, the components, the things that are going to be necessary. Fundamentally, most of those are probably, if not already in place, very close to being in place. Then we're going to have a challenge around policy and people. I'm sure we're going to talk a bit more about that, whether we have the actual skills in order to make it happen across construction. And then the final thing, which we can talk about again in a bit, which I think is really important, is whether we can actually measure it. If we don't measure it, it probably will not happen. And a bit like the performance gap, we'll think we're doing the right thing on paper. In reality, it doesn't necessarily happen. But I think from a technological point of view, the answer is yes. We have the ability to do it.
No, fantastic, and thank you for that response. I mean, it's yeah, but from a technology point of view, absolutely right. We've got the ability, but then it's the measurement and proof in the pudding afterwards as well, which is equally as important, which is often overlooked. So really good points there. Next up, Jeff, what's your take on it? Is it doable?
Yes. So essentially, there's a couple of different ways to look at this. There's a lot of focus on the new building sector, which is relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of things when it comes to carbon emissions. So the big challenge really will be existing buildings, existing homes, existing businesses, and that's where there needs to be a lot more policy development. So we've got, the heating building strategy recently. We've got some fund, streams of funding and some ambition there. The bit that's missing in my view, especially, is that consumer engagement part. So we've gone beyond making changes upstream and making carbon reductions in bits of people's lives that don't really sort of impact upon day-to-day life. Now we're into entering people's homes and businesses to make substantive change. So I think technology-wise, yes, we're there or getting there with some of the stuff that we're working on. Policy-wise, it's in development. Consumer engagement and customer engagement is absolutely a critical bit that needs some more work in my view.
Another really interesting take on it for sure, and again a really important element. And yeah, end user as well. Even once these technologies get into application, it's that educational piece to make sure people are using them effectively. So yeah, fantastic stuff. Next up, if I could just hand over to Martin. Do you think it's doable?
Yes, I mean, I join the chorus there with regards to it being doable, and would support the points already made. I suppose what I would add is, we need to understand, especially this week. I'm joining you from my Edinburgh hotel room before I go across to Glasgow as part of the COP process. Is 2050 soon enough? You'll have seen a lot of that debate on the TV with different countries starting to push back a little on 2050, which I don't think I necessarily was seeing coming. But also, how far do we have to go? 2-degree pathways, 1.5-degree pathways. So yes, as we've heard, and I would echo, technology exists or is close to existing. We've got to apply it, take the great British public and business owners with us on that journey as well. And interesting times ahead. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
No, excellent stuff. Absolutely as well. And I mean, we've got COP26 currently on the way. There's been some really important and exciting developments that have come out of that, which I'm sure have been discussed heavily already today. But I'm sure we'll allude back to sort of during this conversation. And last on our list, so we got Will. Delivering net zero, is it achievable?
I think the short answer is yes, in theory. There are going to be a lot of challenges ahead. 2050 is a long time away. It's 29 years away from now. Now, I think back to 29 years ago. In fact, I hadn't even started in the industry then. I started in 93, and we didn't even have computers. So a lot has changed. So I suppose, yes, being positive, I think we can do it. But my biggest concern is around skills and capabilities, because we're going to need a lot of new skills, and I'm not particularly in relation to understanding some of the complexities of the engineering that is going to be needed. So yes, it can be done, but it's going to take a monumental effort, and we really need to attract a lot of decent people to the sector as well.
Another really good point and a really good take on it. I mean, there's obviously this drive to get it out there, get the technology out there, get it operating, but it's only as good as its support network, which actually I think yourself and Josh have both alluded to now. So that'll be quite interesting as we sort of get through the conversation as we go through. We do have a Q&A section as well, so anyone in the audience wants to throw questions in as we go, wants to direct anything to anyone on the panel, please do. But to get things started, I think I'd just like to direct a question to you, Jeff, if that's okay. Because a lot of the future in net zero has got to be related to energy mix as well. There's not just one way to skin a cat, I suppose, might be the saying. Do you feel that, based on the UK government's, road to net zero, its 10-point plan for the green industrial revolution, they outline some pretty good indicators on what it is we want to achieve and certain milestones for what's going to make this very possible. Do you feel that 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2030 and the ambition to create the first hydrogen town is a realistic prospect? And if realistic, does it go far enough?
Yes, so in terms of realistic, absolutely. In terms of does it go far enough, nowhere near. So there's been an open recognition really from people at BEIS that 5 gigawatts is an arbitrary figure. It's a line in the sand to stimulate investment in upstream and actually get production online. When we start to look at use cases for hydrogen, you've not just got heat, there's transport, there's industry, there's other sectors that will come into play, even power generation. So you'll start to see 5 gigawatts of clean hydrogen will be eaten up really, really quickly. In terms of heat demand, we're going to see blending 20% in the grid relatively quickly, but the real end goal is this 100% conversion of given areas where it makes sense to do so. That's not really going to happen until probably the 2030s. So we'll see town, village, and neighbourhood-sized trials in between times. But in terms of ramp up of mass scale demand, you're looking at 30 onwards. And if you look at the hydrogen strategy, that speaks to potentially a top-end demand line for heat around about 210 terawatt hours per year by 2050, which is it's roughly half of today's UK heat demand. But there's also a fairly big band of uncertainty below that as well. So be interested to see how it develops. But I think 5 gigawatts is a pretty small acorn compared to where we need to get to.
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned as well, 20% blend would be the first step in that. How do you scale that? How does that roll out? Do you start with new build estates? Do you refurbish existing estates in one foul swoop? What's the plan with what's the play?
So blending essentially, appliances that are certified under the gas appliance regulation or the gas appliance directive that came before it, they can quite happily take a 20% blend today, and that's what the high deploy projects at Kiel looked at. So we'll start to see 20% hydrogen with policy change to enable it. We'll start to see 20% hydrogen blended into the national gas grid in certain areas and maybe even nationwide in the next sort of 2-3 years. Up to 20% fine, we can do it with existing tech, existing infrastructure. When you start to look at 100%, which is that's the net zero compatible part of it, that does need changeover. So you're looking at probably retaining infrastructure in terms of distribution, but in the property, in the building, you're looking at new appliances and new equipment to enable it.
Okay, that's really interesting. So there's a point there I didn't actually realise, and that's that the majority of plant already out there, provided it's a new condensing standard, I would presume, is in effect hydrogen ready.
Ready for 20%. So the definition of hydrogen ready is very specific within industry. So we're looking at a product that can be operated on natural gas or up to 20% blend out of the box, but can be converted to run on pure hydrogen at a point in the future with a conversion kit. So that's a pretty semantic point, but when regulation and standards come through, that's what will be in there.
Okay, interesting stuff. Thank you, Jeff. Another question just to throw out there then. So this one I'm going to direct towards Martin. Installing 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. So it's a massive increase on what we're currently doing, but surely that capacity has got to be dictated by a couple of things like availability of product, availability of labour, even the owner's willingness to upgrade and what drives that willingness. Again, realistic prospect, and does it go far enough?
Yeah, well, let me pick those up in order. Yes, we have the capacity. We're a global manufacturer. And while we have all seen the recent supply chain issues, which will have affected all of our businesses, I'm sure, with our investment in our manufacturing here in the UK and coupled with those global facilities, we feel that is that sort of step change is achievable. And just keep in mind, it won't be just us rising to that challenge, of course. I mean, I'm one voice for one manufacturer, but we stand ready to step up. The other items you mentioned, not quite so clear cut, and others have mentioned this as well. And it'd be foolish of me to say that they are. So, I mean, labour, on that point, fitting a heat pump requires same or similar skills as fitting other heating technologies. And we and others in the industry have trained thousands of engineers on our products. But we certainly need more to rise to those sort of numbers and reskill, as it were. But apply their existing skills is the way I would put it. And the homeowner, yeah, that's probably the biggest variable, really. We've seen incentives such as the Renewable Heat Incentive and recently announced 5K grant to help home owners put in a heat pump. But it's how people will respond to needing to make the change when their existing technology is no longer available. We've got a lot of experience with this. We've been doing this a lot of years now with rollout programs of housing associations, local authorities. And we learned early on that you have to engage fully with the owners or the occupiers of these properties, explain how these systems work, how they can get the most out of them, and how they're going to live with them. But so certainly possible. But I'm not shying away from the fact that there's some challenges out there, I think. Scott?
No, absolutely. Okay. Oh, well, thank you very much for that. And I took a point away from there as well, actually. I'd just like to sort of throw back just some additional comment. We spoke briefly about labour there and said that a lot of that sort of labour shortage we're going to have has got to be a situation almost of upskilling our existing installer base, in effect. So do you think we've got the number of people out there? I suppose the number of installs doesn't increase. It's what we're installing that changes, right?
Well, no, I think the number of installs is going to increase if we're to rise to what the Committee on Climate Change is saying needs to be applied at the pace that it is required. So yes, it's a matter of applying existing skills and attracting more people, engineers from every walk of life into this, what is going to be an exciting and developing and growing industry. And that's what we need to be banging the drum for, I think.
No, fantastic. Okay, thank you for that. All right, well, I've got a question to fire over to you, Josh, if that's okay. So you said during your opening statement, the importance of not just putting something into an application or retrofitting something into an application, but the measurement of its actual success. We can do a lot of things based on theory, what it looks like on paper, what we say the efficiency might be from the word go, but what it actually does when it gets there. So I think a lot of what you were stating is more about the actual running carbon emissions and what kind of data we should be harnessing to make sure that it is sort of doing what it says on the tin.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, a good chunk of net zero and the majority of conversation often revolves around operational carbon. But we also have the embodied carbon piece to think about. What energy is being used in the construction phase, what's happening when the building is then in use. If you take a real sustainable view, you then also need to think about how easy is it to retrofit and upgrade things through the building life cycle. And then also at the end of the building's life. And I mean, I'm perhaps taking a slightly different view to others who are more working in a residential space, and I work a little bit more in the commercial space. But to make people appreciate all of those things, part of it's measuring, what's happening in use. Building services is a big contributor, so it should be measured and it should be understood. But I think we have the capability, and actually, if anything, operational carbon is probably the easier thing to measure in general. But we should also, and we will need to, and CIBSE have done a lot of very good work on this already, understand the embodied carbon as well in what's going into the building, and understand that, and understand how it works across the life cycle, because that also plays a huge role in the carbon impact of construction. And that's all parts of it: the envelope, the interior fit out, the building structure, as well as the building services, and it all needs measuring. And if we don't measure it, we probably will not deliver on it.
No, it's a really interesting point as well, because it's so easy to get hung up on the exciting part, which is in effect the engine, but then to neglect all the bits that sort of prove and operate and make sure that it is doing exactly what it says it should do and what actually dictates the embodied carbon or carbon emission rate from that build, for example. It's just so important to have that continuous measure.
Yeah.
A question over to you, Will, if that's okay. So 80% of the buildings that will be around in 2050 exist today. So retrofitting cleaner, greener technologies into existing ones is going to play a massive part of what we need to achieve, because our existing building stock does exist, it is there, and it is going to continue to be there. What do you see as the key technical challenges in this area for that retrofitting process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, I think before you think about retrofitting sort of new technologies to buildings, I think the most important thing is to think about improving the energy efficiency of our existing building stock. I think something like 15% of UK carbon emissions come from buildings, and a large portion of that will be from homes. So obviously, we've seen a lot in the press recently about heat pumps being retrofitted to buildings, but Insulate Britain are making a lot of noise at the moment about the fact that they want homes to be better insulated. We have very poorly insulated homes. So I think the first thing to do is to improve the energy efficiency of our housing stock before we start looking at putting in different energy technologies. So that's the first thing. In terms of challenges, and I think if you take heat pumps as the example, because I think that is probably the technology that most people think will overtake boilers. The main challenges in the domestic sector are things like the flow temperature is a really good one. In most people's homes, boilers will typically generate flow water at around about 80 degrees centigrade and send that around to your radiators. If you simply take that out and put in a heat pump in its place, you're going to have some issues, because heat pumps obviously operate at a much lower flow temperature. They're much more efficient at sort of typically at 40 to 50 degrees. So there are going to be issues with compatibility, with potentially with radiators, with pipe work sizing and things like that. So, I mean, they're not insurmountable, but they're things that need to be thought about. When it comes to the non-domestic and the commercial sector, for me, the challenges are different insofar as we need to be looking at retrofitting things like sort of CHP, and we'll see more heat networks in large developments. And the challenges there are more about understanding the engineering to integrate these things into existing buildings and understanding the nuances. So, for example, a lot of them operate, or they require a constant return temperature in order to operate efficiently. Certainly CHP systems do. Heat networks, they operate at lower flow temperatures anyway. So they kind of bring into play other issues that potentially people don't always think about, because when you've got lower flow temperatures, you're going to have problems with domestic hot water generation, and even things like Legionella and potentially issues with bacteria and pipework and how you clean all that. So again, these things are all achievable, but it's people. We need to have enough people that understand the implications of all of this stuff. And I mentioned this at the outset, my concern is, as an industry, we're losing that skill set. So for me, it's very much about understanding the engineering principles and being able to apply them to buildings.
A very interesting one. And thank you. That was a really concise and clear reply. I think one thing I'll take away from that, though, is that the price of electric is climbing. And if we speak about heat pumps specifically, and Martin, maybe you could jump in on this one as well. We've got an end user challenge where the user needs to upgrade. Without the incentive to upgrade at the moment, the cost of changing an application with what you need to do because of your flow temperatures in terms of emitter changes and etc., it can be quite a costly exercise. And then electric as well. I mean, at the moment, electric is skyrocketing in terms of price. How do you convince the user it's the right move, that you're getting this all singing, all dancing new product that could potentially cost more to run, and the fitting costs are higher than just replacing your existing unit?
Yeah. Yeah,
I know that's quite a strong question, but certainly a challenge.
It's a tough one, yeah. And look, I just me personally, I've been on this heat pump journey now for some 14 years. From getting on the Eurostar and going into Europe and talking to them about it being a renewable technology and how you can measure it as such, through to numbers like 600,000 a year being talked about now in the UK market. And I don't think I backed away from your initial question about that interaction and that discussion with a homeowner, with an occupier. That that's the tricky one. And we certainly, a heat pump as it sits out of the box doesn't have all the answers. Of course it doesn't. And but I think with a concerted effort and fully supportive of a fabric first approach, by the way, absolutely that has got to be the right thing to do first. I'm quoted often in our business a comment I gave many years ago, which was describing that as turkeys voting for Christmas, because if it's done right, the manufacturers of the heat emitters on this call here need to sell or supply a smaller piece of kit, but that is the right thing to do. So not backing away from that, we need a discussion with homeowners, with housing associations, with local authorities about how we can do this together with the other supporting disciplines out there to make this a reality.
No, it's a really interesting one, and the same applies, I think, on a commercial scale or even industrial scale to some extent.
Yeah, we're involved right across the piece on that. So yeah, it's not just a domestic issue by any means.
No, exactly. And with things like the public sector decarbonisation scheme, massive driver, massive incentive to start turning buildings towards a more low carbon running emission state. But even then, some users do steer clear, from what I've heard, because of those elements, like ongoing running cost and sort of the educational piece about what they do to maintain or upkeep these builds. So it's I think user education can't be underestimated in any way.
I mean, the run cost piece is an interesting one. I mean, because we've got a particular set of circumstances now, which is probably beyond me, a whole world of interconnecting issues that are driving these changes at the moment. but there has now at least been some recognition that, you know, you can't just keep loading some of these costs onto the cost of electricity when the true cost of burning, you know, a fossil fuel has other implications. So I'd like to think, you know, that electricity fossil fuel really should tip, shouldn't it? I think we could all agree that. Again, easier said than done, but you know, yeah.
Okay, interesting one. I've got a question here from the crowd as well. So I just like I think Will, you might be the man to field this, if okay. But I've had a question relating to how main contractors and M&E contractors are going to work with subcontractors to upskill them for future projects to make sure that when these sort of new net zero future projects do come through to fruition, the people taking them on are capable of the challenge and not thinking of it as a project that they might have worked on traditionally or even now that doesn't have to meet such stringent standards.
If I understand it correctly, there it's really about education and competence. Well, there's a myriad of answers to that one there, really. But in terms of how main contractors and M&E contractors are going to be addressing that, I think it is incumbent on them to ensure that they are upskilled themselves and that the people they employ are competent to do that. Working with, you know, the likes of BESA and CIBSE and other institutions to ensure that the right education is put out there. So there's no quick fix for that. I think it's going to be, you know, the industry working together and, you know, and doing this kind of thing. But also I think it does kind of link into some extent to the Building Safety Bill and the whole subject of competence. So there's a huge amount going on. It's a great time to be in the industry. You know, there's nothing like a good challenge, and I'm sure we're all up for it. It's probably not the answer you wanted, but it's the answer you've got. So there you go.
I thought it was a great answer, which draws me over to Jeff actually. So no, on that answer then. So I suppose a similar question, but similar concept for manufacturers working with I don't know, they're approved installer networks or commissioning agents or direct employed commissioning engineers, making sure that they've got the same capabilities and competence to make sure things are done effectively and purposefully. Is that something that is being addressed or will be addressed, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a technology standpoint, we're invested in pretty much everything. So, you know, we're involved in heat pumps, heat networks, domestic and commercial, you know, the whole spread. Regardless of what technology goes in, it's got to be put in right and commissioned properly and looked after properly. And that, to me, is one of the big challenges, because if something goes wrong, it's got our name on the front of the piece of kit and we get the phone call, which is always the reputational risk that I'm a little bit concerned about. So we're investing heavily in training engineers across the board. So we've got, you know, a nationwide network of training centres that we own or co-lease with or cooperate with some of the colleges. I think for me, there's two sides to it. You've not only got a bit of a skill shortage in terms of older operatives leaving the industry as they come towards, you know, retirement age, and they're not necessarily being replaced as quickly as they ought to be to keep up the numbers, but also retraining to an extent. So we've got, you know, a big network out there of gas safe registered competent people that work on domestic boilers in particular, for example. And there's going to have to be a big reskilling to actually get a decent chunk of that crowd up to speed to be able to fit an air source heat pump competently to the right standard. So it's not only a bit around skills and training, but also certification as well, and following the right certification procedures.
All right, that's fabulous. Thank you very much, Jeff. Very concise reply. Really appreciate it. And that does conclude this session. So thank you, everyone, for coming along. Hope it was informative and educational. And yeah, thank you for the panel as well for a really informative and in-depth discussion. Thank you for answering the hard questions.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you.
And you're back with me to close out today. Thank you to everybody who attended. I hope you got lots of value from it. We've looked at the technology, the economy, best practice, net zero, and skills, and a range of topics with some genuine experts. And I certainly learned a great deal today. So thank you to all of you for coming. Thank you also to all the experts who took part in the panels, and thank you to our sponsors. We have 2 theatres again tomorrow. Sessions start at 9:40 with Kath Noakes. Professor Kath Noakes, who sits on stage, she's going to be talking about the lessons of COVID-19. Basically, I mean, who knew ventilation was important before the pandemic? Well, we all know it now, and we all value it a great deal. She's a great speaker if you haven't heard her before, and will certainly have something to say. Everything that you've seen today and you'll see tomorrow is available on the website online, so you can ask your colleagues to have a look at it if you thought it was of value to you today. Don't forget to visit the exhibitors' booths. They're there. You can have a look and see what they've got to offer, and try the networking tab if you fancy a bit of speed dating with somebody. I'm reliably informed that you are matched with someone who would be of interest to you. So on that, a final quote from the last session that I looked at from Will Pitt, which was, "There's nothing like a good challenge," in response to will we make net zero. That seems to be an appropriate point on which to end today. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:40 with Professor Kath Noakes. But for today, thank you very much and good evening.